monthly numbers, they're annualized. You typically think about the U.S. textile industry taking 3 million bales of the U.S. cotton crop. And that's the number we were running at roughly before we got to COVID. And then we started in the March, April, May, June, July period. When we talk about April, that was largely a month where it was shut down. We're off 86% from what we would have been pre-COVID. We started to pick that up. We're running at about an annualized rate of around 2.5 million bales. So if you think about pre-COVID being 3 million bales, our perspective on the balance sheet changed a lot over the last year. We went into the year thinking we were going to be carrying a lot of stocks in the balance sheet, came out of carrying about 7 million bales, a smaller U.S. crop, better than expected export performance, and that put us in a situation where now we're about 4 million bales on the balance sheet at the end of the 2020 crop year. And as we look ahead to next year, say 21-22, where's that going to leave us? We got already a lot of challenges looking ahead to the production side for this year's crop. USDA says planted acreage is going to be stable. You all know the weather challenges, the dry conditions that's already there in a big way. So I think, an above average crop in the United States is unlikely in 21 unless we see a major shift in the weather pattern. I think export markets, there's still reason for optimism there. Point being is, I believe as we get into next year's balance sheet, 2021-22, we still stay tight on stocks, and USDA has it down at about 3.7 million bales. So when you get down into that low 20s on a stocks to use relationship, that's typically a fairly tight basis. But we got to watch production, and we have to watch China phase one in terms of what happens with those shipments. Let me talk about a few of the policy issues that we're working on. Oops. I'll get in sync with this maybe by the end of the presentation. Cody mentioned some of these issues that have played out. We certainly saw some economic assistance come to bear to the industry as we went through 2020. We know there's still one more tranche of payments to be made under CFAP. That was assistance that was approved at the end in a package at the end of calendar 2020. That's $20 per acre. Our anticipation is that should be distributed just about any time. So I think USDA is at a point where they're ready for those dollars to come out. One of the policies that we advocated or assistance that we advocated for was the textile industry assistance. Our understanding is that will be also distributed later this month. So I think USDA is also getting close on getting assistance to U.S. textile mills, which will help ease some of the economic burden that they saw when we had that the shortfall and the sharp drop in demand that occurred last year. A few other things: WIB Plus and QLA, Quality Loss Adjustment Program. Those programs are underway. Sign up on QLA actually ends today. There's still some challenges on the implementation of QLA. Frankly, I mean that's been it's been a little bit of a moving target in terms of trying to figure out the exact definitions of what gets turned in and how those QLA payments will be generated. Right now, we're dealing with a little wrinkle, a bump in the road, if you want to call it, on eligibility for cotton, and not only cotton. There's some other crops included in that, but if a producer received a crop insurance indemnity payment that also included indemnities where the production account was adjusted because of quality losses and also received a WHIP plus payment, then right now ineligible for any QLA payments. So we're continuing to see if we can follow with USDA. And also, I know we're having some input from members of Congress and their staff as well to see if that can be revisited. But they're going to have to finalize QLA because that is ultimately going to determine what happens with any prorating, so depending on how far the money can go. And we'll also determine how the last part of WHIP Plus is playing out. So we will continue to follow that as USDA implements all of those various programs on COVID assistance. You know, Cody mentioned when he was doing his update, I think he's, you know, I forget the exact words you used, Cody, but something along the lines of with the new people in place in Washington, it's bringing new ideas and new perspectives to light. And that is absolutely true. And one of those perspectives, one of those ideas, not completely new, but it certainly has a renewed energy and a renewed focus, is climate legislation. And that's an activity we're continuing to follow very closely. We are working now on comments that are due by the end of this month in response to questions that USDA posed about climate smart agriculture and climate legislation and some of the practices that can be done. How should USDA use existing conservation programs? How should they look at various technologies in terms of research needs? So identifying some of those ways that agriculture can focus on, if you want to use the term climate smart agriculture. So those are areas that we're going to be following very closely. There's a lot of slippery slopes, though, in this when we start to delve into these issues. But we don't want some of these things defined, these terminologies, these practices defined without us at the table and being a part of the process. And that's always a challenge that we run into. But we do think something will happen along those lines on the climate side. We know that Senate Ag Committee leadership is working as well on the Growing Climate Solutions Act. And so we'll see where that goes as we move forward. I do anticipate we could see something there. Maybe it's part of a broader package that the Biden administration and Democrats move forward. It may be part of a reconciliation process so that it only needs the 50 votes and Vice President Harris can break the tie. So we may see something along those lines, but just be aware we are going to stay engaged in this process moving forward. Hopefully we can look for if there's some opportunities there that'll work for cotton producers, that are voluntary, that are incentives-based, that also need to recognize the practices that have already been put in place by a number of producers. I know there's going to be a stronger focus on, well, what's the change going forward? But I think for any of this to work and to have widespread appeal, we're going to have to figure a way to address how we can give consideration, give benefits, give something to those that have already adopted some of these practices. But I think expect a lot more attention on this as we move through the rest of this year. We do have within the American Cotton Producers a working group that we're using as a sounding board for putting some of our comments together. They've already met once via Zoom, and that was very helpful. We will also, when ACP meets next week in a virtual format, we'll spend a lot of time on climate legislation and carbon markets and trying to dig into those a little bit further and educate our producer leadership about the opportunities there, the potential pitfalls that exist as well. Get that together. There we go. All right. Let's talk about trade issues. And specifically, we'll start with China. I've already mentioned the 5.5 million bales that they purchased in 2020. And that was a big recovery from the 1.8 to 2 million bales that they had been purchasing. Where that is, did I turn it off? But there's a lot of issues going on with China. One of the things we continue to stress to the administration is that, we need to continue to see phase one move forward. We're in the second year of the phase one agreement now. And so phase one was part of the reason why certainly we saw those increased purchases by China. And we want to continue to see that agreement remain in place as we move through the rest of 2021. But there are complicating factors out there. If we just talk about the overall not just trade tensions, just tensions in general between the United States and China, particularly as they relate to human rights issues, as they relate to technology issues. I mean, you could go down, you could kind of continue down the line of the tensions that are there now. One of the developments that you should be aware of, if you're not already, is that over the course of the last 12 to 18 months, and so a lot of this occurred under President Trump's administration, was to put in place what's referred to as WROs. And what a WRO stands for is a withhold release order. And basically what that means is that if products show up at the U.S. port that Customs and Border Protection has deemed to be produced with forced labor, and specifically when we talk about forced labor issues in China, it is in the Xinjiang, the western region of China, then those products will be held at the port. And it will be up to the importing company, that brand or retailer, to provide documentation that will allow those products that documentation that forced labor was not used in the supply chain, that will allow those products to be released to that importer. And that takes about a 3 to 4 month process to collect that documentation. But what it means is that brand or retailer is trying to work all the way back through the supply chain to figure out where all the production points along the line were, and ultimately who supplied the fiber that went into what country supplied the fiber that went into those products. So right now there's import restrictions on all cotton and textile products that are deemed to be coming from Xinjiang. We don't get a lot of products directly from a company in Xinjiang, but it does come, obviously a lot comes from China. And we know some of those WROs have already been put in place, and this will be one to continue to watch as we go forward. And it may even get broader depending on the actions taken by Congress, and not just deal with, I think right now it's cotton and textile products and it's tomatoes. There's bills that would look at essentially all products. So the trade issue we're going to continue to follow. Other countries of what we're dealing with as we look at exporting about 80 to 85% of U.S. production. Turkey, a 1.7 to 1.8 million bale market. You may be aware that for the last 5 years, U.S. cotton going into Turkey has been assessed a 3% import duty due to an anti-dumping investigation that was put in place back in 2015 through 2016. That is up for a 5-year review. That's something that we will be engaging in as the National Cotton Council to try to argue that those duties should not continue in place. But just be aware that that investigation will be under review by the Turkish government. So we hope we can make some progress there, but I think it's an uphill challenge. Bangladesh is roughly a million bale market for U.S. cotton. We do face some challenges there from the standpoint of they're one of the few countries that requires fumigation. We have been fighting this problem for years. We have made argument after argument after argument about the U.S. production and ginning system, the effectiveness of boll weevil eradication. It's an uphill battle, but we're still continuing to make a push on that, and we've even had some recent activities in just the last month or so to try to fight that. India's another market, smaller market for upland cotton. There's some potential there for Pima cotton. They just put in another 10% tariff on all cotton imports. So there's a lot of trade challenges when we look across the globe. This is just a small snippet. I think one of the other issues, not even really going to delve into it in any great degree here, but just the overall attitude of the Mexican government regarding crop protection products, regarding biotechnology. That's one we will watch closely. We're not the only agricultural commodity watching those challenges. So just be advised, plenty of things going on the trade front, plenty of obstacles that our merchandisers have to navigate through to make sure to find a home for a significant part of U.S. cotton. Let me switch over and talk about some industry issues and initiatives. And I want to talk about one that is a broad-based industry initiative. National Cotton Council continues to be heavily involved in it. Cotton Incorporated has been a great partner in this process too, both from a financial support and from the support of staff. Cotton Board has been involved, as well as CCI. It has been a concerted effort to really bring a new program to life, and it's something we've been working on now really for the better part of 3 years or so, to bring a sustainability initiative that we believe can provide the type of data that our textile supply chain needs, and it can provide them the assurances they need about the responsible production practices, the strong labor regulations that we have. All of those are a positive story that we have to tell, and that's one we're going to continue to push forward, and doing that through the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol. So again, we've really tried to expand enrollment as we went through the 2020 crop. We're going to be looking to expand enrollment as we go into 2021. I will thank those in this room that have already signed up and given us your time, provided your data in a secure format where it's going to be confidential. We're not going to talk about individual producer data. We're only talking about data in aggregate. But your data that you're providing in terms of the management practices, the field level analysis, that gives us a strong story to tell to our textile supply chain. And they are under a lot of scrutiny as they try to answer questions from NGOs, from consumers, from government regulations. If we just look at what we saw in terms of producer enrollment, we had approximately 300 producers that went through all of the requirements of the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol for the 2020 crop. You can see the breakdown by region of the cotton belt. Based on the data provided, those 300 producers represented about 660,000 acres of cotton. That's probably going to be somewhere around 900,000 to 1 million bales out of the 2020 harvest. And that's a good start. I'm encouraged by that. We know it's a challenge to get producers to participate. We're continuing to look for ways that we can, provide at least some type of incentives, some type of recognition or compensation that can at least offset some of the time that it takes for producers to do that. So we're looking for those opportunities. But I will say this, I think when we look at these numbers, all of this needs to at least double for the 2021 crop. If we had 300 producers, we need 600 that are all the way through. I think the demand side is coming for this program, and the recognition's coming. Because if I look at the supply chain enrollment, we've got about 28 cotton merchandisers, essentially, whether it's private merchants or marketing cooperatives. The main ones that are engaged, almost all of them are engaged, and they're a critical part of this program. They have contact with the producers, direct contact with the producers. They know the markets. They know the challenges that the mill customers are facing. And so I can't say enough a thank you to the merchandisers for their work they're doing to help get producers enrolled, to help us collect the data, to help in the verification process. And that, again, that's going to be key to success. We've got about 220 mills and manufacturers that have signed up in the program. And we've really started to, that's really since last July of trying to promote it to that textile supply chain. 27 brands and retailers are in the process of joining. And if you look at some of those brands and retailers, the big name that we got back in December was the Gap and their associated brands. And that was a big step forward. I think we're getting very close to some other brands and retailers as well. Not ready to make any public announcements, but I do think there's been a lot of traction, a lot of recognition about the data the program could provide, the assurances that it can provide. And I think it helps us as an industry. We've established some overarching goals of continuous improvement, and we've got a great track record. Now we're trying to look to the future. This can help us drive that continuous improvement. And at the end of the day, when these brands and retailers have made commitments to say by some future year they want to be 100% sourcing responsibly produced or sustainable fibers, and they're all going to have different definitions of what they consider to be responsibly produced or sustainable. But we want to make sure when they put that definition or that list together, that U.S. Cotton or the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol is recognized on that list. It's going to be what we need to make sure that there's a demand base for U.S. cotton. So you will continue to hear a lot about this. We want your feedback too. And we're working through bumps in the road. We're trying to streamline the process of enrollment. So taking the concerns of the producer into consideration as we move forward. But I really believe As we look at the future and we look at what's going to be expected of our customers, this is going to be an extremely important part of us being able to promote U.S. cotton to our demand base going forward. Jump ahead. A couple of other industry initiatives. I don't think we can make a presentation without talking about the challenges we face on plastic contamination. It's still there. We have resources that are out there for gens, for producers, to check out in ways that we can continue to address plastic contamination. So that is, and not all of it, but a lot of it comes from the module wrap. We're going to continue those efforts. Also know that we are working with, go back. We're working with the American Society of Ag and Biological Engineers, who are trying to put together a standard. So some specific specifications for the round module wrap. And we hope we see something out of that later this year. The National Cotton Council at our annual meeting adopted a resolution to support the efforts and to address some of these properties of a round module wrap, because we are seeing products that are on the market today that are not as durable, that do not hold up under adverse weather conditions, under cold conditions. So we need some type of standard. We have standard now on bale packaging, bale bagging materials. We need some type of standard here, and I think we'll see something come out of ASABE as we look at later this year. On bale packaging, though, let me mention a couple of initiatives. One is that this goes back to, I guess we were 2020 Joint Cotton Industry Bale Packaging Committee. It was brought to the attention to look at an alternative color for the woven polypropylene bagging. And so it was decided that this basically a variation of a blue, which is called Pantone 306, is a color that is easily detectable by the optical machines in textile mills. So it was a color that was very much preferred over white woven polypropylene bagging. So it was approved in the early part of 2020. And I'll say thanks to Chris Berry for kind of leading our efforts on the Joint Cotton Industry Bale Packaging Committee, and glad to see him here at this meeting. But it was approved. Manufacturers started producing it. We had about 1.3 million bales that were in the 2020 crop. I hope we can expand that number as we go into 2021. I believe it provides a product that our customers appreciate from a color perspective. And then in general, we've had some very positive feedback. So we're going to continue to kind of push that forward. Then the other bale bagging project that I would make you aware of is that we get asked a lot about cotton bagging. We have a fully approved specifications for cotton bagging. Actually, it's been fully approved since 1974. We've got about 40,000 of those bags out there that were used by various gens. So it's a very limited pilot program just to see if there is a market for that cotton bale bagging, because it is a more expensive bag. So we're collecting some of the data there. It was used in the 2020 harvest. Thanks to the gens that were willing to do that, thanks to 3 of the merchandisers that we were using, PCCA being one of them that was willing to help us work through this. Also had Staple Cotton and Louis Dreyfus in this project. So we'll collect the data. We'll see how it goes. I'm interested to see the feedback from the mills once we get that information. I'm going to stop right there. I feel like I didn't even hardly scratch the surface on some of the things that are going on the environmental side. Just know we stay engaged in a number of activities, try to fight for the crop protection products that you need, to try to fight off the burdensome regulations or court rulings that come out of the Ninth Circuit. There's just a number of activities that are going on there. So I'm happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time. I'll be around for a while later today and look forward to talking to you at the end of the meeting or over lunch. Let me just close again by saying thank you for your support of the National Cotton Council. We couldn't do what we do without your financial support, your support from your time and commitment, and being willing to carry our message and advocate for the industry priorities. So thank you again, and I wish you the best for 2021.
Okay, thank you, Gary, for that, as always, very informative report on all the council's activities and the industry as a whole. I think we should draw another door prize right now. I'll see if I can see. 5383. Nobody have 5383 left? Okay, yeah, got a winner right here. I feel like I'd be derelict in my duty to not warn anybody that wins a $100 door prize. Don't even make eye contact with Johnny Reed. You will not get out here with it. See, there he is right there. Okay, now let Scott Harmon introduce our next speaker here.
Okay, if y'all bear with me here a minute, I've got a story I'd like to share. I'm not used to microphones. I may be holding this way in the wrong spot, but a lot of y'all who know me know that I have a younger brother who is a pilot for United Airlines, and he comes through, and in the fall we usually spend a few days with us helping us harvest and whatnot, and he and I made a parts run to Lubbock one day, and we come back by Eddie's Barbecue on East 50th Street. Any of y'all associate with Eddie's Barbecue there? You know, I kind of need to plug for Eddie. I feel kind of sorry for him. He sat behind Amanda in the 5th grade at Roosevelt Elementary, and she's calving out heifers at Idlewood now instead of serving barbecue on East 50th Street. But we got the big Frito pie. You know what I'm talking about, the deal with the shredded brisket and the sausage and the big wad of sour cream right in the middle of it. And Jay takes out his camera, and he takes a picture of this. And I go, what are you doing? And he tells me that he's got this buddy that's a pilot buddy that's from Brooklyn or the Bronx or something, New York. And he said he loves you guys. He loves this area. He's enthralled with everything that goes on here. And he begins to tell me this story. Jay spent some time in Denver, several years as the instructor for United. That's one of the domiciles. And these guys that come out of the Air Force, or what they say, they separate from the military. That's the term they use. But these guys come out and they go to Denver and they're trained for the plane they're going to fly. So he gets a new class at Denver, and he tells them that he's raised in Lubbock County. His family's cotton farmers here. And this guy gets all excited, all over himself. You know, he starts telling this story of coming through here. And now get this picture. Here's this guy from Brooklyn, New York, that probably, he might have learned to fly an airplane before he learned how to drive a car. I don't know. But he's got this U-Haul truck, and he's coming from Lackland, headed to Denver. Well, he said that somewhere south of Lubbock, he starts getting these, he says after about an hour of this, he's getting nervous. He's doing something wrong, or something wrong with his truck. He's really concerned. His wife's behind him, probably in a Volvo station wagon with the kids, and he's, endangering everyone's life. So he finally pulls over and has the hood up on this U-Haul truck. He's down under the truck looking for something, and this guy pulls up in a pickup. It says, "Can I help you? You got problems here or something?" And he's going, "Man, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I don't see anything wrong, but I keep getting all this stuff from all these people coming by." And he said, "Oh, son, there's nothing wrong. You're doing fine. That's just the way we are. We're friendly here. We take care of everybody. We worry about each other." So you never know when you have a chance to be an advocate for agriculture or your region. It may be at the gas pump, it may be anywhere, but be courteous out there and everything, because this guy, he's a friend for this region. he's got family up there, and he tells them this is a good place to be. And I think we need all the friends we can get with the situation that we're in now. With that, I'm going to introduce our Congressman Jody Arrington. He was raised in Plainview. In January of 2017, Jody became only the 5th person to represent Texas' 19th Congressional District since its formation in 1935. Starting his 3rd term in Congress, he continues to be an outspoken advocate for reining in federal government, promoting agricultural and energy, strengthening national security, and respecting the Constitution while serving the largest agriculture and energy district in the United States. During his first term, Jody played a pivotal role in restoring cotton to the Farm Bill. You've had enough? Okay, come on up. Come on up.
Thank you, brother. Good to see you. Take care. Idaloo Co-op, guys. Idaloo America. Tracy Saul. Is that y'all's only All-American from Idaloo? That's your latest one. Man, they're so cocky. I love it. Scott, thank you. I didn't mean to be rude. I was trying to just have a little fun. And Steve, will you hold on to my talking points and make sure that tell my staff that I hit all of them on the deal. It's good to be home. It's good to be with you guys, and I feel like I'm with family every time I'm with my producers, especially my cotton producers, and love, beating the drum. I try not to beat my chest. They tell, Mama taught us not to beat her chest. But Dad said it wasn't bragging if it's true. So we are the largest cotton patch, and we are the food, fuel, and fiber capital of the world, and we represent more than food security, as you know. We represent the heart and soul of this country and its values, and that's really what keeps me up at night. But it's what gets me up every day, ready for the fight. To try to make sure that we have the same freedoms and opportunities that y'all have had for your children and for my children and your grandchildren. And let me tell you something. The battle is red hot. And the other side, and they aren't the enemy, they're our fellow Americans, but their ideology is hostile to our way of life. And I will fight to the last drop of blood and sweat and tears to protect what has made this country great. And it's what's represented in this room. Thank you. And as I often say, and I know you know this, I'm preaching the choir, but it really is about freedom for the people versus control by the government. And the more the government expands and the more we transfer power away from the people and the sovereign states of the United States, the less we are that shiny city on the hill. No other force in all the world except the love of God and Jesus Christ. And I'm the chief of sinners. No other force, save and except Jesus, has been more powerful than freedom, freedom-loving people, and a free society. Just freedom empowers and unleashes God's greatest potential for all men created in His image. And when you snuff that light out, and when you snuff that out, or you transfer that out to the government, you're taking away the heart and soul of this experiment in liberty and democracy. And it's not that just our citizens need a strong America. The world needs a strong America. I mean, Ronald Reagan said we're the last best hope of mankind. I think he's right. And that's why, again, it's the That's why it's a labor of love for me to get up and do everything we do and what you do in partnership with me every day for our country. We have a tough slog for the next couple years. We're going to have to do things. It's a new era. And politics have and policies have consequences. There are a lot of folk that don't like President Trump, and quite frankly, there were times I didn't like the way he spoke or the way he acted, but I love what he did for this country, and I loved his courage, and I love that he stood up and he fought for us and he followed through on his commitments. I mean, that alone, just a politician that would follow through on what he said he'd do, is worth everything. All my respect. But we got a new sheriff in town, and they don't believe like we believe out here on most things. And we got to have all those freedoms that we talk about, but freedom to farm and harvest our resources and steward them is going to be important going forward more than ever to articulate that and to defend that. We had some good runs. I've been, this is my third term. It's hard to believe 4 years, Steve, into this, but we've had a good run. You know, we've done some good things. Let's not forget that. So before I depress, and I'm not here to depress you, I hope I'm here to fire you up. I was just on a call. That's why I came in late, trying to secure a lot of money so that we can take that 5-seat margin and we can take that gavel away from Nancy Pelosi, and we can stop some of this nonsense. Okay? And I've been asked to do that, and look, it takes some time away from other things. And I'm traveling to other places besides Idalou and Seminole and Muleshoe and my hometown of Plainview. But they think enough of us that they asked us to be a leader and take a third of the country and try to get the House back into Republican control. And I said, yes, sir, I'll do it. I believe in that one. So thanks for letting me do that, because it takes time. But I also think it gives us more influence, Steve. I really do. They asked us for the second time to be deputy chair of the NRCC. And whether it's those things or it's Richie Neal as a Democrat asking us to chair rural health care for the country, I think it's a tremendous honor. I hope it's because they know that when we do something in West Texas, we do it all the way. And we always aim to exceed expectations. I hope it's that, like Trump, they believe when we say we're going to do something, we do it. I hope it's because they know when we say we'll fight, we'll be the one that's the last standing, still fighting. I hope they also believe it's because we're also willing to work with anybody that we can find common ground with, and that we're not up there to tear anybody down. I'm just not. I said that from the outset. I don't think I've gone back on that. I stomp my feet and I breathe fire on the House floor, but I'm the first guy. The other day I walked up after I was breathing fire on the border issue, and it's really kind of an awkward dynamic because there really aren't many people in the House. But you got the guy behind the speaker's chair, and he's a Democrat because the Democrats are in power, so they occupy the chair. And I'm talking to him, and I'm yelling. I'm like, man, I can't believe it. It's all coming from my gut or in my heart, but I'm aiming it all at this poor fellow that's in the chair. So I come up after the deal. I had an hour with my colleagues on the border, and I walked up the side and I said, hey, Jody Arrington, West Texas, this was not personal, and it wasn't aimed all at you, but your members in your party. And he said, no, I appreciate you doing it. Anyway, he tracked me down, found me, and said, that's the first person ever did that to me. He said, can we have a meeting and can we just talk about something that maybe we can work on together? I've never met the guy. This is one of the few Democrats I've never met. We went to see Henry Bonilla. We did see Henry Bonilla, too. He was down there at the border. He was there at Carrizo Springs. But Henry Cuellar, I said, Henry, we just passed one of the biggest pieces of reform legislation to save rural hospitals. It's called the step-down model as opposed to the stepped-up and basis that we'll talk about. But it's a big, big deal. And if we don't provide basic care in rural communities, if we don't have sustainable critical infrastructure in rural communities, the next generation farmer and rancher are not going to stay and risk all that they have to do to make it work. So it's not just a farm bill, it's everything that affects the rural community and families living in rural areas. Well, Henry Cuellar, Henry Bonilla, Henry Cuellar, the Henrys. Henry Cuellar and I worked together to pass that bill. We passed 5 pieces of legislation, bipartisan, whether it was lowering drug cost or better serving our veterans or rural hospitals and rural health care. I passed more legislation on your behalf in a Democrat-controlled House than I did when we had the majority. So I guess what I'm saying is, oh, and by the way, when we were at the border, I invited Henry Cuellar to speak to our group. And I said, we're not going to shame you. We're not going to put you out there. We're not going to tell the press. We're just going to have a quiet breakfast. We want to hear from you. Steve, those things go a long way. And so while you're fighting the fight and swinging the sword, you got to be willing to get in the ditch and dig with your partners. And you know what? Who's my partner? It's kind of like, was it Martin Luther King said, who's your neighbor? You know, anybody in need? Who's my partner? Anybody willing to do something I think is going to be good for my country. I don't really care who it is. AOC, Ilhan Omar. They were elected by the people of this country in their district. I oppose just about everything they stand for, but I'm going to work with them if they'll help me on rural health care. I'm going to work with me if they can get us a farm bill. If we can get WHIP and finish out 2020 and get to that farm bill where we can work on fixing the structural programs for drought, then I'm going to work with them. They may cancel me, but we're going to work with them because we're going to lead by example. So farm bills, trade deals, man, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Got to keep the pressure on China. We led a letter with 35 members of Congress, and we've asked for Catherine Tai, our new U.S. trade rep, and Bill Sack to have a meeting so we can go through a list of things from WHIP to China, which is, I know, a huge, huge part of this industry, and it's our largest market. So we're just trying to line everything up and knock it down, just like we said, Title I cotton, USMCA, China. Now I give Trump credit for the trade deals more than any single person, but and we said rural health, free markets, fair trade, a good farm bill, and sustainable infrastructure for rural communities. I think we knocked things down on every one of them, but let's reload and let's go after it. And there'll be a lot of resistance and fighting with the flood of foolish policies like the Green New disaster, and then there'll be some opportunities. Let's just keep our heads on a swivel, and just like the coach told you, and I stay on your toes, heads on a swivel, and let's be ready to get in the fight. Let me let you guys guide this conversation, unless I stood up here and Ken Hance used to say when I would talk like this, he'd say, "How's your shoulder, Jody?" I said, "What do you mean my shoulder?" He'd say, "Well, you were patting yourself on the back so much, I figured you probably tore a rotator cuff reaching way back there like that." But look, yeah, Hance ought to know. He's had 2 rotator cuff surgeries on. And he's had a full shoulder replacement on both. Hey, here's the thing. Y'all elected me. I'm ready to come home when you're ready for me to come home. I'm not enamored with it. I'm not in love with it. We moved our family back here. We're as happy as we've ever been with my kids back in a school that says the Pledge of Allegiance and acknowledges we're one nation under God. Come on. You know? So, but I still wake up with the joy of the Lord and the fire in my belly. And y'all have helped me get to where we've gotten every step of the way. You even trusted me when I said I'm going on the Ways and Means. That's the one stinking thing I told y'all. I'm going to be on the farm ag committee, and I hate it because that is the one thing that I've changed. but I did it with you, and we talked about it. And I can promise you this, in looking back after 2 years, one term, and now my second, it was the best decision, one of the best decisions I've made. And I got more of an audience with Trump and the administration. I have more influence in my conference, and it is the best thing we could do. Now, you want to talk about step up and basis being repealed, the estate tax, death tax going up, exemptions going down, and having a unrealized value of your capital gains. They're not going to ask anybody on the Ag Committee how they feel about that. They're going to ask the pro-ag, pro-freedom-loving people like me and Adrian Smith and Jason Smith from Missouri, who claims that they have a little cotton up there too. And we're going to be on the front lines now, fighting the fight on this big tax hike that's coming through. Not only are we going to be back to the number one spot. You remember, you look in the camera and, you score the touchdown. Number one, Mom, love you, Mom, number one. Well, we're number one again. If they pass this business tax hike, we'll be the highest taxed economy in the free world. Communist China has a lower tax rate. That's their answer to one of the worst recessions and biggest lifts in recovering from the economic disaster of this pandemic. That's their answer. So, but for us, it's about selling the farm. Literally, it's about just selling the farm in West Texas, because there's just very few families that will have the cash position to pay that kind of tax hike. So we're going to be going after them good on this one, and I'm going to need your help. Okay, I'll be quiet. Y'all ask me questions. Talk about election integrity, censorship, farm bills, whip, trade, tax, Idalou football, whatever you want to talk about. Thank you for your support. Thanks for having me this morning. Thanks for letting me rant. Speaking of ranting.
One thing I think you mentioned about the corporate tax rate, that I see that Janet Yellen is trying to encourage some kind of base corporate tax rate for the rest of the world. So maybe we won't look so bad.
It's brilliant, isn't it? Yeah. Let us reduce our competitiveness, hamstring the home team as we compete globally. But wait a minute, that might put us at a disadvantage, and the jobs inversions, the companies, the capital, and the jobs that go with them might go back overseas. We had $6 trillion in business investment after Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. $6 trillion. $1 trillion in capital came overseas. We had more jobs than we had people, all the all the metrics. And their answer in a recovery that we're in today, which is epic, is to do just that. And we'll take care of that disadvantage. We'll ask all the rest of the world, because we're Americans. We'll just ask them, y'all raise your tax rates too so we can have an even playing field. That's not how it works. So yeah, it just keeps getting worse. You can't make this stuff up, Steve. We'll have 9%. We will have a 9% higher rate than the average OECD country, so developed country. We have the highest the estate tax already, the death tax, which is an unfair, un-American tax, but as a tax code provision, it's the highest rate in our tax code already, 4th in the world. But they don't care. They're coming for it because they want that money to be used for infrastructure. Sean, I hardly recognize you. You just keep getting skinnier and skinnier. Your wife says prettier and prettier. So anyway, I don't want to get too far off on the tax deal, but that's the big thing. Infrastructure for me means roads and bridges in a system, a seamless and efficient system to move product and people. I have some opinions about states' role in that. I have opinions about how we should pay for it, but the first question you got to ask is, what the heck is infrastructure? Well, to them, it's 500,000 charging stations for their electric vehicles. They're going to spend 115 billion out of the 2.3 trillion on roads and bridges. They'll spend 174 billion on electric vehicles and charging stations. And that isn't the worst. I hadn't gotten to the worst part. So I know we want to talk about WIP, and we should, and let's talk about any of it. But as you know, as a good friend of mine, Walt Haygood, said yesterday, or the day before yesterday, what good is a farm bill if we lose our country? And you can lose your country a lot of ways. And you've heard me talk about the debt, 30 trillion in debt, 225,000 per household. Interest now is almost at $500 billion. We'll spend more on just the interest than on national defense, which is $750 billion in less than 10 years. Social Security is insolvent. Medicare trust fund's insolvent. Every trust fund I know is pretty much insolvent in the next 10 years, the big ones. We don't even talk about that because we don't really want you to know, and we don't want to scare you. The union pension bailout, that was $100 billion of a $600 billion problem. We don't even factor that in, or what we owe ourselves. So it's far worse than you can imagine. And when you do these things, you're asked all the time, what keeps you up at night? What are the biggest threats to our country? Well, I still think the biggest threat to the country is our national debt. And I still think that that's one that when it happens, you can't bail yourself out of. And I still think that when we have a sovereign debt crisis, because there is no political will on either side to fix it, even though I have the only bipartisan debt commission or committee caucus with 30 Democrats and 30 Republicans. We did that. Nobody told us we couldn't do it, so we did it. And we're going to keep doing it. We're going to make every effort because our kids' future's at stake. But the first people they're cutting, Steve, is the first people they're cutting are these people in this room. The programs that allow us to have a stable ag economy, allow us to be competitive in a world that ain't fair, especially with China, but many others. And this would be the first thing on the chopping block. It's hard enough to fight for crop insurance and explain the safety net today to Republicans, to some Republicans, not all of them. Okay, I'll be quiet. Steve just always brings out he gets me fired up. I look at him and I just start getting mad at everything going on. And he said his wife feels the same way. Steve is a warrior. He's no BS guy. He hadn't been since I worked with him and from the campaign till now. He never pulls punches. He's very, just like a good West Texan, he's very straightforward, and he's always informed and substantive, but he's also very balanced, because I have farmers coming at me from every side on everything. And at some point I have to say, I can't go after 100 things. What are the 3 things that we got to go after today? That's just the reality of this world we live in, and the world that I'm trying to work in. Steve, I can't thank you enough. What a great partnership. And a great friendship that's developed over the years. And I'd say the same about Cody. And except that I'm still mad at him. The reason I don't recognize him as much is because he took one of our best members of my team away from me to marry her and have a family. And I just think that's selfish, Cody. I don't know. I mean, we're talking about saving the country here and making sacrifices. And anyway, I can hardly go there. And other questions, comments about, yes, sir. It was disheartening, to say the least. The trip to the border, we led a delegation, and I keep saying we led because I want you to understand there's voting and there's leading, and everybody's got to vote, but not everybody leads. And we led that trip with 13 members of the Texas delegation. And look, it's the best example of what I said earlier. Policies have consequences. And there's not a clearer picture and more bold display that than the border and the Biden administration's reckless policies. And it is epic. It is unmitigated. and I don't know that it will get any better anytime soon, because when you send the message that you welcome anyone to come to this country to cross our sovereign border illegally, and that you will not be held accountable but caught and released, that you will not be deported and detained, but you will be rewarded with a path to citizenship and amnesty, this is what you're going to get. Now, do I think we've got a deal practically with the folks who are here, especially DACA? Yes, I do. Have I already voted on legislation that would give some legal status and peace of mind to the DACA person? Yes, I have. Have I voted on the guest worker fixes because H-2A doesn't work? Yes, I have. So and do I welcome the immigrant? Every freedom-loving, God-fearing man or woman from all over the world who is hungry for opportunities and sees the shining light, the city of the shining city on the hill, and wants to make America their home. But they must respect our sovereignty. They must respect our laws, and they must respect the safety of our citizens first. And then we need to make sure that we have people here that share our values and will pledge an allegiance to our country and to our way of life. Is that too much to ask? I don't think so. So I welcome the immigrant. It's a land of immigrant. You waving at me, you tell me 5 minutes. Hey. Hi, Lindley. How you doing? She's a lady bulldog. So, yep. I mean, the worst of it is a lot of people that say Trump was inhumane because he was deporting people who had due process, found to be here without a legal claim or legitimate asylum, and he deported them. If you don't enforce the laws, nobody's going to take you seriously. But they call that inhumane. And when we're in a place as a country where it's inhumane to enforce the laws, you have the chaos that we have at the border that's burning hot at the border. The worst part is those people that think it's inhumane, they have not looked into the faces of the families that I looked at that have crossed the border, who were completely abused and exploited to get here. And the drug cartels are in complete control of the border. Absolutely, they know our laws better than we know them, and they're laughing all the way to the bank. Because while they got our security forces in the CBP and other law enforcement processing families and taking care of children like social workers and providing that service, there are gaping security holes. And I read where drug overdoses, we're talking about guns, 20,000 a year, people killed in gun-related incidents. 84,000 in the last several months, people have died of a drug overdose. 38% increase in opioids. Fentanyl is the key driver of the opioid crisis epidemic. 38%, 100% is coming from across the border. And do you know, while our guys are off their task of their security mission, the drug cartels are pushing more product than we've ever seen to destroy our neighborhoods and get our kids hooked. That's what's happening. I need to end on another, I got 2 minutes, 1 minute. Any other question? Thanks for asking that. It's a disaster. A disaster. Yes, Sean. Green New. Yes. 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 It's hugely important. I am co-chair, and I say these things so you know that I'm not just breathing fire, but I co-chair with Henry Cuellar and Lou Correa from the Orange County, California. It's an energy trade caucus, and it really was created to get some Democrats in, give them a platform so we could speak it with one voice to the devastation that would incur if we just killed fossil fuels, conventional, oil and gas. And we've got the carbon banks issue with CCC and Vilsack. I think he's the best of the choices on the Democrat side. We can work with him, but we've got to work with the Cuellars and the Cintes and the Jimmy Panettas and we're doing that. Back to work. I'm working on Bill Jimmy Panetta right now. So I am strategically not just running around singing with the choir of the Republicans, engaging these folks where they can be engaged and meeting them where they can be met, and we're carving out that common ground where we can. Even term limits, and I'm a big term limits guy. There's another bipartisan guy I'm co-chairing with, Ro Khanna. He may not know anything about agriculture, but we have an audience with him. So we just gotta work harder. And I told people who elected me in this last cycle, I said, if I can't be as effective in the minority, and if I can't find common ground and pass legislation where it's needed, or fend off, for heaven's sakes, if I can't do that, then you need to find somebody else. You just need to. If you have to have the majority to be a leader and to get anything done, you're in the wrong business, and I'm the wrong guy. And I said, we passed 5 pieces of legislation, and I plan on doing more of that. Are we in a bad spot right now, Sean? Really bad. Is it being rammed and jammed pretty good? Real good. Is it partisan and hyper-partisan like you've never seen before? Like I've never seen before on all these big pieces of legislation? Will it calm down? Will it temper? Will it reset? And will we get back to governing? Yeah, I think we will. Will the damage be irreparable? I think there'll be lots of damage. Last point, 5-seat margin. We're getting the House back. Senate's harder. We got 4 years to suffer through some of this. No disrespect personally, but to suffer through these policies. I think our best days are ahead of us. I still believe that. I was on a call earlier. I said, remember George W. Bush said that guy in El Paso that lived on the sunrise side of the mountain? We have the most diverse class of Republican GOP members of the United States Congress than we've ever had. And you say, I didn't know you were going to talk about diversity. I didn't think you're a big diversity guy. Not for diversity's sake, but the fact is America is a diverse country. It's a strength. It's not a weakness. It's only a weakness when all you talk about is identity politics to divide the country. But diversity is our strength. We got people from all over who come here generally for that freedom that we talked about earlier. Now, I don't know where they're going to go when we turn this country into Venezuela. But for now, they're still coming, and they're willing to die in the desert. And if they'll come the legal way, they're some of the best Americans. We got some Americans that won't engage, that are takers and not contributors. We got more Americans now hooked on the entitlement culture and trapped in government dependence. Some of the best Americans I know are people who are first, second, third generation. I called a gal the other day, 3 days ago. It's all running together. And she works at Happy State Bank, and she became an American citizen. Nothing brought more joy to my heart and tears to my eyes, Lindley was with me, than to congratulate a new American. That new blood is critical for our success. Those folks who come here, Maria Salazar, new Republican. Mario, the former Miami Mayor Cuban, new Republican member. Native American Yvette Harrell from New Mexico, Iranian what's her name? Not Nancy Mace. Anyway, up in Oklahoma, our former NFL football player, African American from Utah, another African. I'm telling you, we didn't lose a single Republican seat. from sea to shining sea. We flipped 15. We got a 5-seat margin, and we've got messengers that look like America, that are carrying the message of the values that are bedrock here in West Texas. And I get to be a small part of that. Thanks to you for putting me in this position for the time that I'm here, while God has me called to this job for such a time as this. Sean, thank you. Steve, thank you. Cody, thank you. Y'all keep working hard. Y'all, my number is 806-317-2683, 806-317-2683. I haven't changed my number since I moved back to Lubbock to work for Ken Hance from George W. Bush, and I won't change it. And if you really need to talk to me, call me. If you need something, text me. Now, I got a few of you guys that won't stop texting me. I'm going to ask you to stop texting me now. And Steve knows exactly who they are. No. Love you guys. I appreciate you. Keep praying for the country. Go West Texas.
Thank you, Jody. We appreciate it. The only comment I'll make about anything Jody said, you know, it's real easy when you're in the minority to just say no to everything and go home. It's a lot of times easier to be in the majority if that's the tact you take. But the fact of the matter is, you can't ever disengage, whether you're in the majority or the minority. And I think Jody is demonstrating he's trying to do that. And so we have to keep encouraging folks like him. That's the importance of our PAC. There are others like Jody that are willing to do that. And those are the folks we got to be supporting, and that's what we're doing. So we appreciate all the work that he's doing. All right. I want to introduce our next speaker. Mr. Jim Wiesemeyer hails from Southern Illinois originally. As a kid, he used to cut grass for the late Senator Paul Simon. And maybe that's what got him interested in politics. At college, Jim's interest in politics continued, but an interest in journalism was also budding. Fact of the matter is, he didn't get a degree in journalism, he got it in history, correct?
Yes.
Jim?
Yep.
With Jim interviewing many famous rock stars who would come to campus, including Janis Joplin. Ultimately, a young, slim, and handsome Jim Wiesemeyer arrived in Washington, D.C., and landed a job as an agriculture reporter, and today he is the dean of the Washington Farm Journalist. Over the past nearly 50 years, Jim has covered it all. He's interviewed presidents, secretaries of agriculture, and countless members of Congress. He interviewed one pretty good at dinner last night. Ronnie Jackson had dinner with us last night. Jim had a good conversation with him. He's covered many farm bills, the Soviet grain embargo, and the debut of the mow-board plow also. He was there when that happened. In short, Jim Wiesemeyer knows where all the bodies are buried in Washington, and he may have helped bury a few. I say all these things in jest. I've got to know Jim over the years, and I count him as not just a colleague and someone met, but as a real friend. We've been on the speaking circuit together a lot of times and had many meals together. And so I want y'all to show him a nice West Texas welcome to Jim Wiesemeyer.
Thank you. Thank you. We call him Dr. Brett. I can't believe you're honestly retiring in June. Is that true? Ooh. See the scoops I get? Oh, no. That's a drain on the industry news. I've got a lot to cover for you. You know how I do it. Rat-a-tat-tat. I want to leave some time for questions. My PowerPoint will be available through your great organization so you could study it a little bit more. And I'm going to tell you at the beginning, I'm still optimistic on this great country, even though I think we're in a ditch right now and further digging down. But I'm still optimistic over the long haul. I'm always wanting to be as fair and balanced as I possibly can be, but it's getting harder. I will tell you not to be too political right now, but that's my caveat. Now, most of you probably think Washington's direction looks confused. It's not. They have taken a hard shift left, and I mean a hard shift. Now we're going to weave through. Now this is from an AgriPulse Farm Journal, AgPulse, survey, and this is just agriculture, and you can see this doesn't echo about the 49% approval of most Americans on President Biden, because in rural countryside, 75% strongly disapprove. That didn't surprise us at Pro Farmer, but the numbers continuing to show that, okay? And we take that at least every other month. We took it through the Trump administration that continued to show the rural sector's vivid support for President Trump, and it wound up being correct. Now, words. I'm a journalist now. Words are very important for me, and I'm already building the Biden administration new dictionary. And I think it's instructive from a policy perspective. The first one is, bipartisan. Now, Biden campaigned on healing the country and being bipartisan, but he's governing partisan. There's no doubt about it. Another word, equity. It used to be the term they used was inequality. So why all of a sudden have they moved to equity? The difference is the definition. Equality is equal opportunity. That's fair. Equity is an equal outcome. So that means they want to redistribute. That's another word for redistribution. Another one is big. The Democrats like big government and bigger, and you're seeing it right now, but not family farms that try to make ends meet using economies of scale. Big is bad, I'm telling you. If you're big, they're going the other way, with your policy. On the tax situation that Mr. Arrington talked about, they'll say it out loud. They want to soak the rich. Now let's look, higher individual rates for those with income over $400,000, higher corporate taxes from the current 21% to 28%, higher estate and capital gains taxes that Mr. Arrington talked about. If you want a recession in agriculture, that'll give it to you right there, if they do that. Capital gains taxes, not just in the rural sector, but across all investors. I personally don't think that's going to happen because there'll be a bipartisan push against that when it really gets debated on it. I hope I'm right. Possible elimination of stepped-up basis. Oof. Again, Mr. Arrington talked about it. Major implications. Farm Bureau, on Farm Bureau's site, has an excellent, it's their leading top economist, John Newton's last column that he's written. I would read that and keep it handy when the debate happens, because Farm Bureau did the ag sector a good service by that column alone, because it pointed out consequences if stepped-up basis is lost. But all this with big is bad, but the Democrats want to return the SALT deduction to help high-income earners in blue states, New York, New Jersey, Illinois, and California. So isn't that interesting? There's a point of demarcation. Infrastructure. It's easier to define what is not included by the term now. They throw everything in now. Not just roads and bridges, that Mr. Arrington said, the traditional infrastructure, but they have a new term now they use is social infrastructure. You see how the words are getting very important. You basically eradicated the boll weevils, but you've got woke infestation going on in your area right now if you don't know it, okay? This is major stuff. Now, after elections, we had a trifecta. where the Democratic Party in this case want to control the White House, House, and Senate. Now, the Republicans had that before, and when that happens, this is how Obama got his Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, if you will, and how Trump got his tax cuts. It's easier to get major changes when you control all levers. Now, Biden is going even a lot faster than anyone realizes. Why is that? They know internally they're very likely to lose the House, if not the Senate. And they have about a year and a half in his first 2 years to really get a lot of things done from their perspective. So that's why he's being very bold, very early for his agenda. There's a buzzword, I don't like to get too wonky on you, budget reconciliation. That's defined as you just need 51 votes. You can't filibuster a budget reconciliation bill, but you would need 60 votes. And that's how they got the $1.9 trillion in recently. That's how they're going to get the infrastructure bill perhaps done through reconciliation. So when you hear that term, that's a procedural process to get 50 plus 1. And in that case, they would have the plus 1, with the vice president breaking all ties. In this case, Kamala Harris. Now, the Biden White House executive orders. We saw President Obama use a lot of executive orders when he was president. We saw Trump do it, and Biden is doing it on steroids, okay? It's not the weight of the law. That's why I always like to see changes done codified into law. But since we can get very few things done in Congress, no matter what your political perspective is, they've gone the executive authority route. But now we're going to have court actions. When Trump was president, you saw attorney generals take a lot of his policies to court. You're seeing the same thing now with attorney generals from Republican-leaning states take Biden's executive orders to court. More regulations. I think they're going to attempt to return to the waters of the U.S. rule. I think the courts will, more than likely deny them that, but I think they're going to take another run at it. And watch the Clean Air Act rules to limit CO2 emissions. So we're going to go back to the regulatory process. Issues, I'm going to very briefly go through COVID-19, infrastructure, healthcare, immigration, and voter registration. Voter registration is key. It's H.R. 1 bill in the House and S1 in the Senate. And that's the Democrats' game plan to have almost permanent control of Washington by federalizing elections and taking away states' rights. That's how I analyze it. And they know they want a power grab right now. And they figure that if they can change the voter registrations, it'll increase the likelihood that they'll remain in power. That's bottom line stuff. And that's why it's important to agriculture, that you need a balanced policy. I don't like when Republicans administrations are in all the time. I don't like when Democrat administrations are on time. You need checks and balances, but we don't have that yet. Other issues, farm and food nutrition policy, I'll go through, trade, tax, energy, and climate change, okay? Now, Biden's cabinet, I'm not going to go through them all, but the biggies. Treasury Secretary, USDA, and the U.S. Trade Rep. Janet Yellen is the Treasury Secretary. She was a former Fed chairwoman, so she's pretty smart. She's a woman who's made it in Washington, and Washington still is a sexist town, let me tell you that. She's one sharp cookie, if I can even use that term anymore with a lady, okay? She's pretty smart, okay? Now, she knows what the Federal Reserve wants. I personally think the Federal Reserve is getting too cozy, with the Biden administration, and that could come back to haunt us in the future. We had the Producer Price Index come out today. 1% growth was about double than what the trade expected, giving the initial indications that inflation is on the rise. And if that continues, the Fed is going to be wrong, and they're going to have to increase interest rates, not this year, next year, maybe once or twice, because that's what the futures market is signaling right now. Now, Tom Vilsack returns as USDA Secretary. He was the Ag Secretary under the Obama administration for 8 years. Now, he was making about, when you talk about his benefits at this dairy group, of about $1 million. Now, why did he come back? Not that money is everything, almost, but it's not everything, okay? But why did he come back? Now, he told us in an AgriTalk interview that he turned down Biden the first time he called. And finally, he said yes. Why did he say yes? We had to go to a commercial break before he answered, and we didn't come back to the, answer. But sources tell me it was two things. He was given a pretty good free rein on climate change as it impacts the ag sector. And two, his working on the equity issues relative to selected farmer minorities. And that key word is selected, okay? Remember I said that. Those two things brought him back because in his first term as USDA, his major sin, and because he was overall a very good secretary for 7 out of the 8 years, his first year, he really wasn't a production agriculture secretary, and he learned some lessons right away. But Shirley Sherrod, remember Shirley Sherrod? He fired her until a full description of what she said to a newscaster was known, and then he had to admit he made a mistake. So I think that's in his gut to go back not only to that, but now he's got the Washington in place that he really wanted during the entire term of the Obama administration. What did I just say? His first year out of his 8 years under Obama, ProFarmer, we criticized him because his first year he emphasized the 80% of farmers who only produce 20% of the crop. And then his 7 remaining years, he switched and focused on the 20% of production agriculture that produces 80% of the production. So big wasn't bad then. It was the efficient producer. Which Vilsack are we going to see this time? His initial indications is he's back to that, focusing on the small to medium producer. Not that there's anything wrong with being small or medium producer, but at the detriment of the larger, usually more efficient operations. Okay? Now, you'll always look at the key, deputy secretary and undersecretaries under agriculture. And deputy secretary is Jewel Bronow. She's an African American, comes from my new home state of Virginia. Now, she knows agriculture. She was a Farmer State Executive Director of FSA, and so I know she knows farm programs. If you have come throughout the FSA system, she's been on the education front at Virginia State University. And I bring her up because either her or Robert Bonney is the deputy chief of staff. If you ever have an opportunity to read about him or listen to him, do so, because he's an up-and-comer, and he's the expert that Vilsack taps for climate change as it affects agriculture. So you got to sit up and take notice. I personally think that Vilsack is going to be a transition secretary. I think Biden has another, quote, higher role for him somewhere in the administration. That's my gut, telling me that. Watch your other USDA undersecretaries, the old Bill Northey spot at the farm production, FSA, etc. Mike Schmidt is the acting right now. Now, I bring him up because he's been transferred from Debbie Stavenow's office. She's the Senate Ag Committee Chairwoman. So some of these recent announcements on CPAP, or PAP as they call it now, is kind of being directed by Mike Schmidt and by Debbie Stabenow. I said that says a lot right there. Now here's what you don't hear probably from anybody else. The Senate Ag Committee, specifically some of Stabenow's staff, they don't cotton to cotton producers that much, I'll tell you that. The only thing they're familiar about is cotton is when Michigan State University plays in the Cotton Bowl, okay? Be aware of that. Now, I'm not saying Debbie Stabenow is not effective. She is. She usually gets what she wants. So, got to find some way to win her over, okay? It's going to be hard. Catherine Tai, U.S. Trade Representative, Mr. Arrington said that. She speaks Mandarin Chinese. She's got bipartisan support, by the way, which is rare in the Disneyland of the East, the town I love and hate at the same time, okay? She was a former deputy in the U.S. Trade Rep's office under several administrations. She was a principal writer of the language in the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, specifically as it pertains to environmental and labor provisions. She is very articulate and very smart, and her forte is enforcement of existing trade agreements. So, she comes with a pretty good pedigree. Michael Regan is the EPA administrator, headed up North Carolina's EPA. The ag groups have been pretty positive towards him because his history shows that he'll at least listen. He's not an ideologue, that he's more practical. Gosh, we haven't seen that at EPA, recently, over both administrations recently. So let's hope that's the case. Energy and climate change. I have never seen in my over 40 years of covering Washington one issue being mentioned by every cabinet person when they were introduced to the public. So this is a whole of government, is what Biden likes to say, a whole of government approach to a topic. So other than the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines, this is their number one issue that they're going to wrap a lot of things through. Today, the White House released Biden's first broad outlines of his first budget. In there, they emphasize three topics: climate change, education, and healthcare. So that shows you always look at where their money is going. And USDA got an increase of $3.8 billion, primarily for climate change. So that tells you where they're going. Now, the budget has to be approved, but that's the earmark. You don't have to do any study on it. Follow the money, okay? Now, personnel are important. John Kerry, former Secretary of State, is the international climate change czar. Gina McCarthy, you remember her as the EPA administrator under President Obama. She used to love the stick rather than the carrot, okay? She doesn't have a pretty good pedigree in the ag sector, let me tell you. She's writing behind the scenes a lot of the climate change proposals that's coming out of the Biden administration. She's the domestic one that all the cabinet people have to go through. So she's an important gatekeeper. Michael Regan, I've already mentioned EPA, and Jennifer Granholm used to be Michigan's governor. She knows automobiles. She should know energy. Now, biofuels' role in climate efforts. Finally, I think the biofuel lobbyists are thinking smart. I don't think they've had the best lobbyists, to tell you the truth, in Washington. They've been defeated in a number of areas. And now they're wising up. They're saying, we've got a low carbon fuel standard we can do in the higher octane, the E15, E20. The sweet spot is E25 and E30. Watch them bridge that into the climate change debate and the reworking of the renewable fuel standard, because the authorization for that ends in 2022. So a lot of important changes are going to go on there. Now, Biden can do a lot on climate change through executive action, and he already has. Regulations, legislation is going to have to be needed. What about this ag carbon bank, that you keep hearing about? It's mostly, the details are fuzzy because there's no details. I can't write a special report on climate change on might be this, might be that. They don't know yet. They don't know. Now, the ag groups sense a big potential revenue stream ahead. I don't blame them. Potential. But remember, the ag sector, thankfully, helped defeat the carbon tax a few years ago. Now they want a seat at the table, which they should. Because why? Trillions of dollars are going to be spent on climate change. And we'll see which way. But what farmers and ranchers tell, pro-farmer is this, relative to, climate change and ag sector. One, it should be voluntary, not mandatory. Two, it should include payments to the legacy farmers and ranchers who did things that new entrants in practices will get a payment for, such as no-till, etc. So those are legacy costs. Farm state lawmakers know that. I bet Mr. Arrington has heard this from your producers as well. And then they want to know, how is carbon going to be measured and how is it going to be priced? Those are all questions right now. Now, my next calendar shot that I'm waiting for is April 22nd. That's Earth Day. Now, Biden is big on days, that's Earth Day. Now, I know they're working with USDA, Robert Bonney, et cetera. What type of big announcement for USDA and climate change could they announce on Earth Day? To be determined. But at least I've told you what to watch out for, okay? If you hear about it, let me know, okay? They may release a series of principles, general things that they feel is going to come down. As far as that carbon bank, there's a thing that USDA called the Commodity Credit Corporation, CCC, Charter Act. Now, just a few years ago, people such as myself and Colin Peterson, House Ag Committee, and other wonks who like foreign policy, we talked about it, but it made your, eyes glaze over. But now, since Trump tapped that for a significant portion of the CPAP payment funding, not all, a significant portion, all lawmakers, both political parties, see that as an ATM machine. Ooh, let's go get some money for this purpose and that purpose. Now, it's funded at $30 billion, and it's reauthorized, to do the cap. Now, what I think they're going to do is eventually put another $20 to $30 billion for the borrowing authority for the CCC, from 30 to up to 60 billion, but use a big portion of that for climate change and conservation programs, perhaps putting in that as a higher baseline for the new farm bill. Now, that's speculation at this point, but watch that development potentially play out. USDA is trying to figure out what to do on carbon sequestration. They don't know yet. This is so complex, Pilot programs are likely. Now, in the dinner, conversation with Ronnie Jackson last night, it was very interesting. I must admit, he's innovating. Let me tell you. I told him he asked me, "What have you learned covering Washington for over 40 years?" I said, "You want the secrets of the tomb." He said, "Yeah, pilot programs is the way to go. In Farm Bill, if you're in a county or district or whatever you call them here, I know they call them something in Louisiana. They call them parishes. See, whenever I go to Louisiana, I always learn again, while I can drink with a Cajun, I can't keep drinking with a Cajun. You learn that every time you go. But I told him, if you're in a county and you really want something, but you can't get enough votes to get it, have your lawmaker do it as a pilot program in any legislation, but definitely the Farm Bill. And he said, why is that? I said, there's a budget angle to that. The Congressional Budget Office, which is the official scorekeeper of Washington, of Congress, does not score pilot programs for a long-term duration. They don't know it's a pilot program. So it goes unscored. So just a little tidbit for you. And I gave to Ronnie Jackson because he looks like he's going to be a mover and shaker in the years ahead. I gave him some other ones, but I can't remember them what they are right now. I told him CCC Charter Act. That's I called the White House once and said, Reagan ought to tap the CCC Charter Act for the Contra funding. That's a joke. Boosting conservation spending is coming, big time. It's coming. Biden's push for electric vehicles. Arrington mentioned this, 550,000. Now, the EVs, electric vehicles, their lobbyists are smarter than the biofuel people. Why do I say that? They're working on infrastructure. Remember, we went for years in which the biofuel industry debated going from E10 to E15, and they didn't have the pumps out. They didn't have the tanks ready, okay? And EVs are going to come. Now, I almost got a Tesla, but a couple neighbors had them, and they told me that they loved them, but when something went wrong, they had to wait a few days to get it fixed. I don't like that. I'm your average American. I got to have it done today, okay? So I backed off. But I'm a lover of cars. What did I like about EVs? It pushes your head back when you're at the red light and it turns green. The power of an EV car. So what did I buy just a month ago? I bought a Hyundai SUV because it had 311 torque on a SUV turbo. I said, I don't need an EV, and it gets better mileage than my other SUV had. So there's a lot of progress still going on in combustible engine. Bottom line, the gasoline, yeah, it is peaked in use. The RFS, the Renewable Fuel Standard, is based on miles driven. That has to change. If you're an ethanol proponent, because we're going to continue to go down as we have more hybrid cars and EVs. So that's why the biofuel industry is going to have a new strategy on that one. And I'm a history major, and I went back and looked back of how many years did it take to really move from the horse and buggy days to the Fords, okay? And it was about 20 years before it first started. So we've got another 15 to 20 years because now we're efficient. We're getting more efficient in those batteries. And that'll continue. Never bet against the ingenuity of American, technology. Okay? Tesla shows you that. And they're going to get better and better. So about 15 to 20 years. That doesn't mean that the gasoline and diesel cars are going to go poof. No, there's too many cars on the road, and they're going to continue to increase in technology, but it's going to be an amalgamation, for that industry. Now, RFS, I've already talked about that, but you can study this. I want to save a little time here. There's a number of decisions that's going to have to be made, but what the Biden administration is waiting for is the Supreme Court is going to hear the case April 27th on the small refinery exemption ruling by the 10th Circuit Court. And once we know that, that's going to unleash a number of other decisions by the Environmental Protection Agency. And EPA has been asked to study whether electronic vehicles charging could generate the RINs. So this is from a market perspective that people are already thinking ahead of where the EVs are going to impact the RIN markets. I mentioned the authorization for RFS expires in 2022, and that debate is already beginning. BILSAC, mentioned before, this is a changed BILSAC now. His first interview early in his new tenure, he said these are the issues that are at top of his agenda, in which he called a very active and proactive USDA. COVID relief, equity and inclusion, there's that word again, climate and regenerative agriculture, rural economic development, nutrition security and assistance, open and competitive markets, USDA employee morale, because he thinks it went down under the Trump administration, and Forest Service management in an era of climate-driven wildfires. There's his agenda right there. And he's very focused. I mean, he's a very sharp guy, lawyer by training, okay? He was an orphan who was picked up on the steps of a Catholic church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you don't know his story, he tells a lot. And why he's so interested in nutrition, by the way, is growing up, let's just say he was a chubby boy. And his adopted parents put pictures of fat boys on the refrigerator. So it's ingrained in him literally on food and nutrition. So in that area, you're not going to change him. It's passion to him. Okay? Now, the Biden administration, I've said before, and I'll say it again, look at their appointments, because I think that says a lot. I think BILSAC is probably not choosing his, sub-cabinet like he did under the Obama administration. They're being chosen for him. Okay? National Farmers Union gains clout, usually in a Democratic administration, but is it just that they're going to support everything that the Biden and USDA does? I think it's fair to ask that question. Ag panels, are they bipartisan? I guess mainly so, but boy, there's some fractures lately. You got to watch the appropriations committees. That's where the action's going to be, and that's very partisan right now. The next farm bill, not this year. No matter what you may or hear, they're not going to do much, because the Republicans sense that they're going to win the House and maybe win back the Senate. So they don't want to do too much on a farm bill. Okay? They'll have field hearings, or they'll have a look-back hearings on the current farm bill, and they should. Crop insurance, the best risk management tool I've ever seen in my career in covering agriculture. Hopefully they won't foul that up. Okay? There's still bipartisan support for crop insurance, because it's food insurance to a lawmaker who really knows that. But losing Pat Roberts, on retirement, Senate Ag Committee Chairman, Mike Conaway, I don't have to tell you Mike Conaway, and Colin Peterson. That's almost 85 years of collective career history. You don't replace that right away. So now we have a new order, and I'm going to go through some of them. Watch this equity review when it comes to crop insurance. I don't think they're going to do anything, but boy, they're going to take a look at the data in crop insurance to see if there's any bias, okay? Appropriations is always an area you look out for silly amendments on crop insurance. The next farm bill, there'll be some, amendments offered, and debt reduction ahead. You're not going to have debt reduction for the next minimum 2 years. And Republicans in the Trump administration, they didn't mention debt hardly at all. So both sides are spending money more than a drunken sailor, and that's an understatement. Okay? Modern monetary theory is what it's called. Print whatever you want. And that's where we're at right now. The only editor Congress has is the bond market. If the bond market thinks that Washington has lost control, it's not there yet. your real interest rates are going to go up higher faster than anyone realizes. But we're at least a few years, from that. I mentioned CCC Charter Act. On food policy, food stamps. It's interesting that the Democrats have really put in huge amounts of more funding for food stamps in the CPAP bills. So I don't see how they could have hardly any more money into that program. I mean, it's really top heavy in food stamp funding. Labeling issues are always important when the Democrats come in. So the food industry is a little nervous of what they're going to recommend. Mandatory country of origin labeling will at least, Bill Sack has said he'll take another look at that, but there's always potential World Trade Organization problems. Antitrust review. This is a big one for the Biden administration because Bill Sack is creating an antitrust task force in the agriculture and food processing industry. And I'll let you read, those bullets. But here's the bottom line. I see them taking a significant look at potential antitrust issues in the seed industry and in the meat processing industry. That's what they tell me are going to be the two topics they're going to look at relative to the ag sector. Okay? Now, important lawmakers in the House, moderate Republicans, and the far left Democrats. Now, notice much of the press, if not all of the press, call far left Democrats progressives. You've heard that term, right? I won't take the bait on that. That's just a decoy because the Democrats did not like the word far left Democrats, okay? So both of those are important in the House. Why? Because Nancy Pelosi can only lose 2 votes amongst the Democrats. And if she loses more than 2, she needs some Republican votes. So she's going to have to cater to AOC and the other far left Democrats and or get some moderate, Republicans. Now in the Senate, most people mentioned, Manchin from West Virginia, moderate. Coons from Delaware is really Biden's plate man because he comes from his, quote, home state of Delaware, and he's going to negotiate and be a close contact. So when you hear what, Coons says, listen up. Sinema was mentioned from Arizona, and Tester from Montana is a populist. You never know which way he's going to go on issues. On the Republican side, Senator Susan Collins from Maine, Murkowski from Alaska, and Romney from Utah are the ones that the White House will usually go for to see if they need any Republican votes. Now, the Republican senators up for re-election in 2020, 20 versus 14 for Democrats. So they'll probably look at those 20 up to see if they can, get them to vote a certain way. Okay? Now, filibuster, elimination. Biden and a number of other Democrats have talked out loud about either modifying the filibuster or eliminating it. The filibuster is just, you need 60 votes on most legislation to stop debate. Okay? Now, the keys to this, Manchin said just the other day in the Washington Post op-ed column, he is totally against eliminating the filibuster, and he does not want to modify it. So that should be the death knell for that. But certain lawmakers change their position. Sinema is another one who says, no, we do need checks and balances. We need bipartisanship. Now, if the filibuster would end, some aggressive Democrats, it would be one-party rule. They would at least push for statehood for the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. Now, I think there's constitutional problems in D.C. statehood, but not that they care about that anymore. And Puerto Rico, at least 3, if not 4, of those potential senators would easily be Democrats. Okay? So there's justification here of why the Democrats are doing what they do. And you saw they would want to pack the Supreme Court. Again, I think it's unlikely because they would need Manchin and Sinema's vote, and they're not going to get it on that. But they're still upset at Trump and the way he unfolded the Supreme Court. So that's why they want to add 4 more, Supreme Court justices, at least a growing number of Democrats do. You've seen some issues on gun control. Biden yesterday released some executive orders, but he really needs legislation changes to get what they want on gun control. I don't think it'll happen. Labor union bills, they undermine state right to work laws. I think you'd see a push for that if the filibuster would end. You'd have immigration reform the way the Democrats would want it. Okay? And voter registration. That's the HR 1 and S1, that I talked about. Now, even if the filibuster is eliminated, if the Senate Republicans hold together and prevents a quorum, okay, they need 51 without Vice President Harris. I've already looked into this. Now, Schumer, as majority leader, could compel the Sergeant at Arms to produce senators if they do not show. In other words, haul them in. You've seen this in some states. I think Wisconsin had it a few years. Texas, you have, so you know. I can't rule anything out in D.C. right now. I've got to be ready, GOP senators would have to go into hiding. So, this would be a field day for the cable stations. I mean, can you imagine? You play hide and seek. Oh, my God. Rachel Maddow on the prowl. Oh, God. It could bring the Senate to a total standstill. That might be a plus, okay? But don't say I didn't warn you, okay? Now, Infrastructure Plus. Reconciliation is going to be used, only 50 votes needed. Can Democrats hold their ranks? Again, Manchin's going to have to be dealt with. Sinema. $2.25 trillion. That's only part 1 of 2 parts. When I first came to town, millions of dollars was the term in legislation. Then it became billions, and now it's trillions. That's called inflation, government-wise. What's for ag and rural America in this package? Okay? Is it really going to help narrow the rural-urban divide? It looks like rural housing, telemedicine, broadband, rural electrics, rural water, and sewer when I go through the numbers. The investment in some rural highways, roads, and bridges versus urban. Yeah, we desperately need an infrastructure bill. Definitely. So let's hope that they'll get some part of infrastructure because the great country needs it. Social infrastructure is included in this, but even more in part 2 to come, which will be almost another $2 trillion that he's going to debut sometime in May. Okay? Part 2 is tax policy to help pay for the infrastructure. So you see how these things are tied together, of how they're trying to group all this together in order to justify policy. Now, in the Senate agenda, the Georgia races was key. And my analysis shows that Trump helped defeat the 2 Georgia Republicans from some of his actions. Stabenow returns as the chair of the Ag Panel. Bernie Sanders, the socialist at the Budget Committee. Isn't that ironic to have a socialist to head up the Senate Budget Committee? I mean, it's talk about an oxymoron. Wyden at Finance. Now, I always like to bring up finance because, much like Mr. Harrington told you, the reason he chose Ways and Means was because, he said stepped up bases and all tax writing stuff. Trade policy goes through the Finance Committee in the Senate and the Ways and Means in the House. 60% or more of all important legislation goes through those 2 panels. So I think he had a pretty good justification. Brown, Sherrod Brown from Ohio is at banking, and Durbin from Illinois is at judiciary. Their focus in the Senate echoes just what the White House wants: climate change, transportation, infrastructure, and healthcare. Now, the Republicans, the ranking member is Bozeman from Arkansas. He knows that, anybody who chairs a committee, if they're from the South, they know that they have to talk with and deal with people in the mid-I states and northern tier states to get anything done. He knows this, and he's bipartisan. He's a pretty good guy. Grassley, Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican from Iowa, is timed off the Finance Committee, and now we have Mike Crapo from Idaho. You have to be careful how you pronounce that. It's the new ranking member. So listen to what he says as well, especially in the tax area. Now, the House, smallest control, margin of control since 1945. That was even before I was born. Now, that's old, 218 to 212 right now is the margin. 2 votes. She can lose 2 Democrats only. The end of the band on earmarks in the House? Yes. What are earmarks? They got rid of them, I think, in 2011 under John Boehner, Republican from Ohio, when the Republicans controlled the chamber. And earmarks is when they allowed certain lawmakers to target, to specify funding, usually in a transportation and infrastructure spending bill, to a certain district, county, or state. And frankly, I thought that they threw the baby out with the bathwater. So I think this is a return to more power for Congress and less power for the White House. The Senate is eventually going to be pressured to follow. You probably heard and read about PAYGO, in which certain bills have to be offset their spending by cuts elsewhere. Now, again, I don't want to get too wonky on you. They did end PAYGO in the House for COVID relief, climate change, and infrastructure. That tells you their priorities again. But, they need a waiver bill. Biden's going to have to sign a waiver bill for statutory PAYGO to avoid big cuts in Medicare and farm programs. And he will. I mean, the town loves to spend money, both parties, in the White House. So don't get too upset about this. It's going to be waived, okay? Somebody tries to scare you, just, give them my email. Texas loss of power in the House. Ag Committee. No West Texan. Long time since that was the case. Now, Ronnie Jackson told me last night that he's got the commitment that, he didn't say if, he said when the Republicans regain the House, he'll go on the House Ag Committee because they'll have additional members available. So he's going to come back on. I thought it was very important when Vela decided not to chair, to retire, because he could have chaired an important subcommittee. That said a lot to me right there. So there's no Democrat on the panel. From my recollection, Michael Cloud is the only Republican on the panel. He's from Corpus. Help me out here, I think. He's from Corpus. Now, silver lining. Frank Lucas from Oklahoma used to be the House Ag Committee chairman in the writing of one of the Farm Bills, 2014. Says he's going to get back on the committee in time for the next Farm Bill. Now, he's not from your home state of Texas, but he knows your issues. And he's astute, and he's a cooperator. So I think that's a good sign, for the future. The addition of Colin Peterson to the ComDestel consulting group, advocate group, for the ag sector is important to West Texas in my judgment. We had a long interview with, Colin Peterson on my podcast, Signal to Noise, where 99% of the stuff out of Washington is noise, okay? So I go for that 1% signal. But that whole program was 100% signal because Colin just really laid out what had happened and what will happen in the next few years. Go, Google signal to noise and, listen to that. Thompson is the ranking on the House Ag Committee. He's supportive to production agriculture, even though he comes from Pennsylvania. We've had him several times on AgriTalk. David Scott is chair from Georgia. He's good friends with Austin Scott. But I will tell you, David Scott is very different. First Black American ever to chair the House Ag Committee. And I mean, you talk about focus on socially disadvantaged farmers, our selected minorities. He's just really focused on that. Sanford Bishop, an appropriations subcommittee chairman, is a pretty good lawmaker, and he's bipartisan. You can work with him. You can work with him. Now, ag appropriations, more footstep funding, I don't think any's needed. Watch amendments. Bozeman is ranking on agriculture, and Holden, John Holden is ranking on appropriations, and both of them are very good for production agriculture and know your issues. So you always got to have effective people on the ranking side as well. Now, CPAC. I'm going to let you study those, but I'm not going to go through all of them. But I will tell, why did it take almost 3 months for those announcements to be made? It was because when Biden won, Stavenow's office contacted the White House and said, have Vilsack review this unspent money and see if it should be redirected to certain areas. And that's really what happened. Now, we have what we call CPAP AA, additional aid. Processing of some applications are currently underway. Then they have PAP, which is an odd acronym, but PAP, it's a new effort, but still to be detailed, is at least $6 billion in payments for several commodity sectors, including biofuels. So biofuels is finally going to get some funding, I think, for pumps and things like that, infrastructure. Textile mills, you're going to get $80 million. We have to see the details, okay? Still unknown is payments for contract growers. Now, pay caps. This is important for this country. Perdue, when he was Ag Secretary under Trump, he provided a payment limit for CPAP 1 and a separate limit for CPAP 2. That was very good to the livestock industry especially, who bump up against those caps, and more than a few cotton producers, I would think. But then Vilsack put the new PAP payments under the same limit as CPAP 2. In other words, no increase. So if tapped out under CPAP 2, there's no new aid under PAP. And they saved that money. They estimated how, I think it saved $500 or $600 million, and they moved it to their favorite sectors. This is what happened and why. Now, if not tapped out under CPAP 2, PAP payments may still be reduced if those CPAP 2 and PAP payments taken together exceed the single limit. So there's constraints under how much money is provided to larger producers. Okay, there's the signal. Payment, okay, now this is a sensitive issue to many people. Payments and aid to selected minority farmers by ethnic group. Now, this doesn't include a minority white female farmer. Not included. Okay? Now, in that bill, in the $1.9 trillion package, Congress included $4 billion in 120% debt relief payment. That if a selected farmer, let's just take, for example, a black farmer, had a loan out that was guaranteed by USDA, either directly or guaranteed through a private bank, they get 120% payoff. And that extra 20% is to pay the taxes on that income. Now, the Congressional Budget Office scored this, and it's going to be a huge potential payment for each farmer that is, quote, eligible for this. You don't have to prove discrimination here, by the way. Going to get a huge payment. I tried to remember what it was. It's either, I know it's over $100,000, and it could be over $200,000. But here's the kicker. I always go back to funding sources, and the language for this says, see, I put $4 billion, and that's what everybody will tell you. But the language says such sums as necessary. That means it could be $5 billion, it could be $6 billion, or or more. Now, the black farmer lobbyist in Washington called this a down payment. This is just a chit. They're going to go after a lot more money. And you're seeing individual states do reparation payment. I don't think there's any other way to put it. Now, there was a Republican bill to deal with the discrimination against others. That's going to go nowhere in the Democratic-controlled Congress. But is there going to be a challenge in the court coming from, say, a white producer? And that's going to be an interesting test case on this. The Supreme Court has ruled remedial relief to remedy past harm is okay if racially based. I went and looked at the scripture there. The outlook, what's going to come up in new legislation is a push to purchase and redistribute federal lands to black farmers. So that's going to increase here in the focus. I personally think that the Democrats were really scared when Trump made inroads in the minority community in the votes. You could see it in the numbers. You remember when Trump said, "You have been voting for Democrats for 60 years. What have they done for you?" That got Democrats nervous. That's why you're seeing some of this action, for sure. Now, WHIP Plus. Timing, when will second half 2019 crop payments be made, and will they be made? This has been the poorest operated USDA program I've seen in my career. They held it off. They had this silly rule that no more than 25% of an FSA office could be manned at one time. You could be employed at one time. You can't say man now. And now they recently changed that to 50%. Okay? You go through drive-through windows. So that was part of the problem there. Quality loss adjustment payments. Harrington said, correctly, the sign-up ends for that. So we're going to get some information now on whether all those, second half 2019 WHIP payments are going to be made. And Senator John Thune, call up AgriTalk from yesterday. We interviewed John Thune, and he talked about all these subjects. And he said once they know how many farmers are dealing with, both the QLA and the personnel in the offices, they'll be able to calculate if they need any additional funding, which was a signal they might provide additional funding for WHIP Plus. And then you have Ronnie Jackson and a couple of others are pushing WHIP Plus for 2020 crop and 2021 potential disasters. So a lot more is to happen in this one. Key economic issues. Now I'm going to rat-a-tat-tat because I want to be at least a little on time. Vaccine implementation is the key. That's driving this whole country right now. I'll tell you, when I came to lunch with Dr. Verrett yesterday, it was the first time I saw a whole restaurant without any mask. I felt like I was a sin. I thought I had to go to confession, I mean, it was a breath of fresh air. What did I eat, And then, where I live in D.C., the only time you had freedom from the mask is when you went to bars, and you could take it off to drink. And I got drunk every night, just from not wanting to wear a mask, So now, boy, I could have fun down here. Bottom line, you can feel it. We're back. We're getting back. Jerry, ING. We're coming back. And the markets knows this. Your 401k should be 501k, maybe 601k, etc. The savings rate is a lot higher. There's $1.9 trillion more in savings over the past year because Americans couldn't spend it. Don't ever remodel a kitchen in a pandemic year. I'm trying to. I finally, after 5 months, got most of the appliances that I wanted. Okay, 5 months. But this fall, I think we're going to see an unleashing of a lot of supplies. Why? Monetary central bank policy remains favorable around the globe. World economic growth, IMF, just earlier this week, 6% growth in 2021, this year. Why is that important? You cotton people, we should know this. World economic growth is important because the ability to buy. So Merrill Oster and Pro Farmer many years ago taught us that if your world economy's growth is at least 4.5% or more, you have the potential for demand pull markets. And that's what we're seeing right now. If the vaccine is widespread, growing again, look at it's world, U.S. and China. And U.S. and China are clearly leading the world. There are some people in developing countries, some countries, developing countries, and Europe is not growing as fast. Okay? And you can go through the numbers individually by, country and how important they are to cotton. I'll let you have time to study, that one. U.S. economy growth rate, IMF said 6.4% in 2021. I think it could actually be 7%. That's what's driving, the stock market. Jobless rate is going to trend down. I think it'll be just over 5% end of this year, but that's still millions of people unemployed. 10-year Treasury yield, I think is going to end the year 1.8%. It's about 1.65% now. Mortgage rates are going to rise to 3.5% or higher. We've seen the lows. Okay? If you try to buy a house right now, you're probably going to be bid out of it. Now, that's usually the signs of a top for me. I've seen two tops in my life, two big tops, and I don't know how close we are to a top in the housing market, but to me, I think it's getting closer. It's getting silly. When you bid for a house that lists for $700,000, I had my nephew tell me this. He must be doing quite well. He's trying to buy a house on the Ozarks along the lake. Listed for $700,000. He and his partner bid $825,000 and got bumped out of it. Talk about a hot market. That's a hot market. Okay. I told him, you better be careful. You better be careful. Now, inflation is on the rise, but the Fed's saying transitory. Transitory. They're going to let it run above their 2% target, which is not close yet. Watch the U.S. dollar and the bond market. Almost every analyst I consulted earlier this year said the dollar is going to trend lower. Of course, they were wrong. It's trended higher. So if the dollar keeps going up, that's telling me future traders are signaling we're going to have higher interest rates sooner than what the Fed is saying, and we'll have higher interest rates relative to Europe, so it'll support the dollar. Okay? So also watch the bond market. Agriculture now is next. Working capital, we reached a peak in 2012, and then we've gone down every year since where it got down to the core. We were getting down to very nervous areas here last year. Then we got the turnaround in prices, but you don't solve a problem in 1 year. We need multiple years here. I'm not going to go through all, but we're in a fledgling bull market in corn and soybeans. Cotton, I think once they see the total production, if this drought continues, that's going to get the futures traders really excited and pick a number. I think we're in a multi-commodity bull market, for this calendar year. I hope it's not drought-led. I'd rather see demand-led markets. But I will tell you this. I could spend a whole presentation on what's going on with USDA's estimates. All my career, I have never wanted to be negative on USDA's estimates because they're statisticians. They want to do a good job. They don't do it on purpose. They don't do it on a political ground like some charge. No way. But they missed the cotton market. I called Mr. Ferret here in August last year and said, is that USDA numbers right? And as only Steve said, I couldn't report about 70% of the words that he said. He was spot on. He said they have missed this crop big time. They're too high. What's happening? They did the same thing on the corn and soybeans, not only on the production estimates, but on grain stocks. Now, in corn and soybeans, we talked to NASS, they who make those estimates. They said the response rate for the corn and soybean estimates was 58.8% in this last report. You know what their goal is? 80%. So I think it's a combination of farmers sandbagging USDA now more than what they've done in the past. But NASS also said the I states are consistent. They don't have a problem with that because they look from year to year. He didn't say it, but he goes some other states. When you look at their map, North and South Dakota and Minnesota, he didn't say they lie, but they do. North Dakota lies the most on crop reports, by the way. I did ask, I found that out. But we're going to see if this theory is right because when you file what? The June report, your acreage report. Corn and soybean acres are going to go up 2 to 3 million acres from what USDA is saying. Now here's bottom line on this. I've been, again, I used to be a market reporter. I've got people I've known for 30 years saying, you know, they're nervous about USDA's getting behind the curve here. They need help. They need the new methods. They're afraid that the private industry, and they're right, is getting ahead of USDA. So some big firms are contracting with remote sensing companies who can send out drones at a key production time that counts the number of your soybean pods. So you don't want that to happen. I mean, private industry, yes, so be it, let them go. But NASS should also be tapped into that technology as well. So bottom line, something's happened at USDA and they need to improve it. Government payments was about 40% of farm income last year. It's going to be different this year from the market. Meat processing plants are back to almost full capacity. That's good for feed markets. Food service industries is going to take longer to return. Farmland prices, much like housing prices, are on the rise. And they're sensing this demand pull markets. Crop insurance guarantee, look at cotton, 83 cents. I didn't have to talk to too many of you to know that you're nervous about the rainfall or the lack of. And you know your final planting dates. And the users of cotton know them too. They're nervous because that isn't attractive, that 83 cents. So I just always hope for rain, just not too much of it. So hope you get it. Tax policy, I'm not going to go through. We've already talked on that. Trade, I think Mr. Arrington covered that. I think that we'll have I think we're going to rejoin the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. Watch the first international official from another country is coming over from Japan's prime minister later this month. And Japan wants us back in to the TPP. And it's going to be important to know what does Biden want to rejoin that, because Congress is going to have to vote in favor of it. I think we're going to have new trade agreements with United Kingdom and Kenya. The Fast Track Authority, Trade Promotion Authority expires in July of this year. I think it'll eventually be renewed. TPA is when you can vote on a new trade agreement up or down without any amendments. I think it will be extended, but it's going to take a few months to do that. Cuba trade policy, Biden will go the way of Obama in improving relations with Cuba. The House Democrats are watching the USMCA relative to environmental and labor issues. Future elections, just my predictions. I think that the high odds that the Republicans regain the House after 2022 elections. And as far as the Senate, the numbers don't look good, 20 to 14. But when you go through state by state, it's going to be very interesting to see if the Democrats overreach with some of these proposals that several of us have talked about. If Americans think that they've overreached, redistributing wealth, etc., the Democratic Party will have a price to pay. Okay? Will Donald Trump run again in 2024? I'm not going to take that issue on. Okay? I'm just not going to go there. My last one, I talked about HR 1 and S1. As if we don't have enough to worry about, I'm a Catholic Jew. I worry about everything. Okay? Geopolitics. Biden's going to be tested. China thinks we've peaked, so they're going to consistently test Biden. Russia, Iran, and North Korea, some at the same time. More and major cyber attacks, big in the future. Black Swan, we didn't see COVID-19 coming. Is there another one? Civil unrest, not just in the U.S., but other countries. Senate change, a flip, we're on a death watch. It's that close. Biden's health. He's older than Reagan was when Reagan left the White House. You know, all great men are dead, and I'm not well myself. You know, I know how I feel, and he's older than I am. The last one, if African swine fever or another disease, such as foot and mouth disease, ever comes to North America, Canada, U.S., or Mexico, major impacts for not only the U.S. livestock industry, but the affiliated feed industries as well. So that's on your worry list. That's why you have to have research. That's why you have good organizations to ask about these things and to monitor. Now, I think we're over. Okay, we're over. But my email is on there. Email me with your particular questions or comments that you have. But again, I want a bottom line. We are going through a major, bold, let me shut that on. Attempt by a political party to dramatically change the direction of the country. I think that's a fair way to put it. How do you monitor the news? Frequently, you ask me that. There's very few news programs I would recommend to you. One is Bret Baier on Fox News, the best news program I know. Not the cable news, not the Hannity types, etc., but Bret Baier's, special report. It's on 6 o'clock Eastern, so it's probably 5 o'clock here. And also Wall Street Journal report on the weekends, I think, is a good panel area that talks about the news. Yes, from a more conservative perspective, but at least they have different perspectives on the program. Overall, agriculture to me has turned the corner, and we're now into fledgling bull markets. That's needed. It looks like the U.S. and world economy is on the roll right now, but there's a price to pay maybe later on, with all this money being thrown not only by the U.S. central bank, Federal Reserve, but other central banks around the world. Okay, that's it. I thank you very much. Okay, sure.
Okay, thank you, Jim Wolford. That is a mother load of information there, wasn't it? And yet, after all that, I keep coming back to one question I can't get out of my mind. Scott, what that frito pie had sour cream on it have to do with people waving? Well, I'm glad I'm not the only one. Okay. Anyway, I also want to thank Farmers Co-op Compress. They underwrite our keynote speaker every year, and we're very appreciative of that. We got one door prize, 5337. You got it? Okay, got a winner back there. Thank you. Congratulations. Next, we have Steve Barrett, our CEO of the PCG. He's going to come give his report. Steve, got that coveted slot between now and lunch.
I don't ever mind giving up time for Wiesemeyer because he's always got a lot of information. I always find it very valuable. I hope all of y'all did as well. I'm not going to spend much time because I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch, and I think it's ready to go. So the first thing I want to talk about, all the thanks that I want to give, and there's many to give. I want to thank all of our sponsors for this event. Brent mentioned about Farmers Co-op Compress sponsoring the keynote speaker. But if you were here for breakfast this morning, Delta Pine sponsored that, and the lunch you're going to have in a moment is FiberMax is sponsoring that. So let's give a round of applause to all our sponsors. And then I want to thank all of our speakers again and the relationship we have with all of them. These people that we invite, we don't just invite people because we see them a name or whatever. Maybe they might be interesting. We know all these people, and we have relationships with them. And so, you know, whether it's Extension, the part that they played on the program today, we're always glad to honor our Extension personnel. We rely greatly on you, and we appreciate everything that you do. Lubbock Cotton Exchange and the Texas Cotton Association. Where did Bo go? He may have already gone out. But the relationship with the cotton merchants. Of course, the National Cotton Council with Gary Adams and all the field staff, Susan, Rick, the folks that we work with on a daily basis. Jody Arrington, I hope it's evident that, you know, he does know who you are. He knows who we are. He knows our issues. And he's willing to work on our behalf. And last but not least, Jim. Like I said, he's well known, but we've known him for a long time, and we've developed a personal relationship that we can rely on him for things and can communicate in confidence a lot of times and try to find out information. So again, thanks to all our speakers today and all the information that you brought to us. Lastly, I want to, well, maybe not lastly, but next, thank all the staff of PCG, and then our board of directors and executive committee. First, for the executive committee and board, you know, lots of times people come to us as staff and they say, you know, you need to change this. I don't like a certain thing or whatever. And it's always a good thing. I always like to say, you know, that's a great deal, but I don't work for you directly. I work for a board of directors, and they're the ones that set policy. So if you want to make something happen, you get involved, or if you're involved, you be a part and you come sell what you want to do to the board of directors. And that's how the policy's made. That's the way it works in these organizations. Gary, right? You know, we're fortunate enough that we help guide policy a lot of times, but we don't make it. And it's our job to carry it out once you set it. And so to our board, our GIN members and the board members that come and participate, we appreciate you greatly. We appreciate the support of this organization. And for our staff, I started about that. You know, this meeting probably was one of the most flawless. I did less for this meeting than I've ever done in preparing, is what I'm saying. David Denson, our office manager, and Whitney Curry, our new communications director, everything was taken care of. But that's in addition to the regular job that they do every day. David's our office manager and takes care of all of the bill paying and keeping us all in line and where we need to be. And Whitney's new on our staff. She's our newest staff member and getting up to speed on communication. She knows a lot of you already. Some of you know her, but she's going to get to know the rest of the industry. Mark Brown, our field operations general, is what I consider him. He's our face that's out meeting all of you GIN managers and GIN boards and stuff, doing an absolute marvelous job. He was the county agent extraordinaire. We robbed him from Extension to come to work for Plains Cotton Growers, and he's done a marvelous job. For Sean Wade, does policy and risk analysis, and I say this every year and I mean it. You know, when you want somebody to dig into the details of whether it's policy and understand, but certainly crop insurance, there's nobody any better. Nowhere. And so we've got the folks. I always tell people, if we don't know the answer, we can get it. And that's what we strive to do. And then for Cody Besson, our Vice President of Operations, Cody's everywhere, whether it's in Austin. He's been very active in Austin this year. He chairs the Texas Ag Council. Tom Engelke, who's here, knows what it's like to do that and kind of keep that group moving together and working together during the Austin legislative session. And, we hadn't been in D.C. near as much, but things are beginning to loosen up a little bit, Jim. We're going to be headed back there and doing some more stuff in person. He talked about the PAC. He takes care of that. All of our staff, I just can't say enough for. Every one of our staff, when they wake up every morning and they come to work, they only have one thing on their mind. What do we do to make cotton producers' economic life as good as it can possibly be? That's what drives everything we do. Sure, it's a job, but it's all about the people that we work for and the people we represent. We're proud to do it. So, thanks to all of you. Appreciate it. This is a great crowd we've had here today. Most of you stayed to the very end. There's very few people out in the halls, and we appreciate that. And it's good to see all of you. So the last thing we're going to do is draw for one last prize, and then I'm going to lead a prayer to bless our foods. Oh, I've already pulled it out. I put it here in my pocket. It's not mine. I don't even have one. Okay, for the last $100, 5329. Do we have a winner? 5329. Okay, all right. See David back there in the corner. She's got the money. All right, again, thanks to everybody. If y'all would, join me in prayer, and then we'll go out. They've got lunch set up, and bring it back in here and socialize for as long as you want. One last thing. We do need to remember board members. We have a board of directors meeting no later than 1:30. So, if we all kind of get finished up, we're in Sunset C. Am I pointing in the right direction? Okay, next door. So let's head over there when we kind of get through with lunch. If we get started around 1 or a little after, that'll be great. Don't have much to take care of, but we've got a few things to take care of and get that done. So